consists of the first 12 verses of the second chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Hear these words. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. May God add blessing to the reading, hearing, and living of this holy word this day.
Thanks be to God.
Please be seated.
So who were these guys that traveled so far? What was it that they thought they were going to find? Well, the only thing that we have for sure from the scripture tells us that they came from the east and they brought gifts. They were not kings. Sorry about the song. Some translations have used the word wise men, but there's no evidence in the Bible itself that they were ever kings. This is part of our story that's developed over the last few years, well, hundreds of years, but it's not an original idea. It came later. Some say it was done so that the guys would look better. I don't know. And it's found its way, of course, into the hymn that we just sang. But I still need to ask you the question, who were they? The Bible doesn't exactly tell us they were wise either, at least not maybe in the ways that we think of wise today. And the word that Matthew uses in his gospel, and we need to remember that Matthew's gospel is the only one that gives us the story of the wise men. It doesn't call them, it doesn't translate to wise men, it actually translates into the word Magi. And that's where we get our word magician. And that's the only clue, if you could call it that, of who these people might have been, these travelers. We do know from history that Magi were usually people who watched the stars. Sometimes we say that they maybe were fortune tellers, soothsayers, or dream interpreters, and that might all be a part of what they did. Biblical scholars suggest that they probably came from Persia, and that they likely had access to Hebrew writings. Otherwise, they might not have bothered with this sign that a new king was to be born. And I have to tell you that there's some who say that in this region where these Magi came from, that they allowed women to join their group. Now that's probably very contrary to our image of these three solitary camel riders. But there's a better than average chance that their caravan had more than 3 men, that there were probably as they traveled, and we're not sure they rode camels. So there goes the whole story. So they weren't kings, they weren't all that smart, and some of them were probably women. What a story, huh? What we do know is that they had been watching the sky. They had seen some sort of light, some star, a nova, a convergence of planets. Everyone wants to speculate on what that event might have been, but something in the sky caught their attention. And not only did it capture their attention, but it caused them to strike out on a long and arduous journey, probably of at least 1,000 miles. So you would think something this huge would have been seen by others. And yet this is the only record we have that anyone even noticed anything. And they are the only ones that seemed to make a journey to find out what was going on. So we have to ask ourselves, what made some people see this star and immediately pack their bags and head across the desert to who knows where, looking for a new king? And a Jewish king at that. And just in case you're not familiar, these travelers were not Jews. So why is it that we have to assume, well, I don't know we have to assume, but I think probably that others should have seen this star and said, what is that star? We should go find out. But it seems as if the wise men or the Magi were the only ones that did that, and while the rest of the world said, nice light show, let's go back inside, have some supper, get to bed, tomorrow's another day, go home. But when the Magi got to Herod's court, and here is an example of them not being so wise. A wise person at that time should have known that you don't go to a Roman king and ask if they know where the king of the Jews is. And the scripture tells us that Herod was upset. Yeah, he was really upset. Herod's the guy that's killed all of his relatives in order to make sure nobody tries to overthrow him on the throne. So you can imagine that Herod was a little bit more than upset. So Herod gathers his scribes together, and he asks them, so what's going on? Is there something in the scripture that talks about this, or some prophecy or whatever? And so I imagine the scribes scurry back to their books, and they look at something, and pretty soon they come back and say, sure enough, there's an old prophecy in Micah that says that a Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. Now you have to also ask yourself, why didn't those scribes in Herod's court, who had access to the ancient scriptures, have their own eyes looking toward the skies? Why didn't they see something up there and try to figure out what it was? Why was it that the foreigners had figured it out, but the local priests and scribes didn't have a clue? You see, it seems as if something magical and mysterious was going on. Some people got what was happening and others didn't. There's a preacher who tells a story that he was visiting some good friends in New Hampshire, and while he was there, they took him on a hike up to the top of a mountain peak, and there they had a picnic. And they sat, and as they ate, they were able to look out over this beautiful valley. And he said that he was awestruck and silenced by the majesty of the beauty of the work of God that was laid out around him as he ate. And he said while they were up there in this beautiful setting with all of these wonders of nature around them, there was another person that was with them that spent all of his time trying to get his smartphone to work so that he could check his emails. William Watley says, it isn't the light that we see, but the light that we follow that makes us wise. So who were these wise ones? It's likely that they risked their fortunes and their reputations to travel so far. It's likely that they would have been traveling for at least 2 years. And they had traveled to see royalty, a king. And there they were, led to a child in humble surroundings, of poor parents, in an out-of-the-way place called Bethlehem. We have to ask ourselves, what stirred in their hearts to compel them to risk so much? A journey like this would not have been an easy would lead them to travel so far. I have to ask myself, and I think of myself in their place. I'm not sure I would set out on a journey. It's much like the journey that Abraham and Sarah were asked to take by God to an unknown place. When they set out, they had no idea where they would end up. But I began to think of all the other journeys over time that have been taken. I wonder where our life journeys will take us. I wonder what draws us in, what compels us, what yearnings do we have to make journeys that don't seem probable at the beginning? And what makes our journeys possible? What makes our journeys necessary, even preferable to living the life that's right here, comfortable where we are? What sign in the sky would it take? What communication from God would make us do something so radical as to set off to discover meaning for something that we have no idea where we'll go? And then it strikes me that those travelers to Bethlehem were simply living their lives to their natural conclusions, because they had been living their lives studying the stars. And when they saw a particular star that seemed to hold some more meaning than just a regular star, all they could do, if they were going to be true to who they were, they had to follow that star. So they studied the stars, and they felt a particular prodding to follow that particular star on an incredible journey. Certainly there have been other stars in the sky that might have been as enormous or as grand, but this particular star called to them, and they took that journey. And when they came to the place where the star stopped, they were met there by God. Now we can imagine that this wasn't exactly what they might have expected. At least they hadn't expected to see God in the form and circumstance that was before them. And I can only think that whatever experience they had that caused them to kneel down and worship and pay homage, that there was something in that moment that would change their lives and they would never be the same again. Because in that moment, perhaps they realized exactly who was that child. And they knew in that moment that it was God's Son. And that's the meaning of the word epiphany. It means God revealing Jesus to the world. And in that moment, they became who they were meant to be. They became what God had planted inside them to be. And I think that's true for us. And this is what can happen for us. At some point in our lives, there must be a point where we follow God's leading out of the most comfortable places in order for us to encounter the Holy One. And it might not look, and probably won't look like we thought it might. But in that surprise itself, we discover where God resides. Now, Matthew, in his gospel, goes to great lengths to remind us that the events surrounding the birth of Jesus fulfill Scripture. It was important that that point be made. And that nothing about Jesus' birth was accidental. Matthew makes the point that God's love touched these events and moved them to their intended end. And I believe that is what the message for us today is, what I'm going to call the gifts of the Magi, is to know and to understand that nothing in our lives is accidental. I don't mean that we don't have choice, but it's just that if we use and develop the gifts that God has planted within us, and as we become who we are meant to be, and if we keep our eyes and ears and hearts open, when we set out on a journey, we will find God revealed to us in those unexpected places. And we will live into who we have been called to be. And I can guarantee that it's pretty certain that when that happens, that our lives, your lives, will never be the same again. Because I believe that is the gift